We have Edison Gomez-Krauss. Who's running for Board of Supervisors,
3rd District.
3rd District. And then Liam, go ahead.
And Liam O'Mara, I'm running for the 42nd Congressional District that runs from Verona, Eastville, Northville down to Temecula.
Perfect. So Liam, if you want to start and just kind of give us a little bit of information about yourself and why you decided to run.
Okay, so the short. So I am a professor of history. I focus mostly on the Middle East and Europe, and have basically an academic background in this stuff, but never really figured that I was going to be in politics or a politician. Never figured I looked like a politician. But it's hard for me to stand on the sidelines and ignore a lot of the problems that we're just kicking down the road constantly because people no longer pay attention to actually data-driven solutions to things. They just want to talk and yell at each other, dominate the media, and not actually discuss what's going on. Right? So I want to try and bring a little civility, a little discussion, a little intellectual heft to the conversations in Washington is sort of my goal there. And one of the things sort of pushing me personally is I've been looking my students in the eyes for over a decade and realizing that they have sharply narrower horizons, fewer expectations. My generation was the first one in American history not to do better than its my parents' generation, right? In terms of living standards. Our living standards have been falling for 40 years. The millennials that came after me are much worse off, and the people graduating high school now are even worse off from them. We have fallen to 17th in the world in living standards, and this, in the richest country in the history of the world, offends me. Right? And I'd like to make some arguments about that.
Hi, everyone. Edison Gomez-Krauss. I am an ESL teacher from ANZA, and I'm running for a similar reason to Liam. I'm also a politician that does not look like a politician. I'm running because, as a teacher, I fear for my students' futures, basically. I don't see them having the opportunities that my parents had, that even I had. So I'm standing on the shoulders of a grandfather who had 2 families, and he put him through a good life with a good union job. He was a steel worker, and he gave all of my father's siblings a college education, those who wanted it. And now I'm making $21 an hour, where a steel worker is making $44. So one of the important things that I want to see is my generation was sold the idea you have to go to college, you have to work in an office, and you will make a living. And I want to give these kids right here, thank you for coming, by the way. Kids are very apathetic nowadays. I love to see young people out here. I want to have opportunities for them to have a broader horizon, be more valuable to the workforce and to society itself, having all these options laid out in front of them, not just a single, you have to follow this path to success. So that's kind of why I'm running, and I want to discuss that a little further with you guys. Liz?
Okay, I'm Liz Lavertu again. I'm running for state assembly. I'm running because life has gotten harder in our state. It's hard to work 40 hours a week and be able to afford a place to live. My son right now is in college, and he's already looking at what state can he move to so that he can afford to work and he can afford to live without living at home with his mom. So this is the problem. As I'm going and talking with voters in the area, we have 2 ends of the spectrum. We have our youth who's growing up who is looking to move out of state so that they can get a better life. And then we have our seniors, like my parents, who are struggling to retire with dignity because of the rising costs for our senior population as well. I'm stuck in the middle of everything, struggling as well. I am a mom of 2 who's living paycheck to paycheck, like many people in our district. And I'm realizing that, we shouldn't have small, tiny baby condos with 2 bedrooms that are over $1,700 a month, when people are getting paid about $15 to $14 an hour. The math doesn't make sense. So we need to make real solutions in Sacramento. We need more affordable housing options. We need to make sure that we are investing in our communities for better paying jobs, and that we can help the environment along the way too with investing in renewable clean energy jobs. So just a few of the reasons why I'm running, but I will talk to you more when we talk about some of the issues. Okay. So you had a question for Liam? Yeah.
He's already
Share it with the group. Share it with the group.
So I will. So I'm an international affairs kind of guy, not a state or a city guy. And my question to Liam was, the Middle East has just been a cesspool for us to throw money into, and I'm tired of doing it. And I'm also tired of seeing our servicemen at peril. We recently put the Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, and I knew that Tehran had a hypersonic missile that could take it away. The guy who put the Abraham Lincoln there didn't know a hypersonic missile from a balloon. So I'm looking for a way. I looked to Liam, and he actually briefed me on how we would get out of it. And it's not easy, and I knew that when I addressed it. But we have to do it because it's none of our business. It is none of our business. So I want to get out there as quickly as I can, but I want to do it rationally and reasonably.
And how many do that?
Well, the single biggest factor driving a lot of this is actually not what's happening in the Middle East, because a lot of the problems that have built up over there, we don't make any better by being involved, and we have often made them worse. The biggest problems are actually our domestic politics. After World War II, for the first time anywhere in the world, after a major war, we didn't demobilize, we increased military spending. And it created a massive engine, right, where the defense contractors want to keep building stuff, so then they donate to people in Congress who will then push through bills purchasing the stuff there, and then they spread the work all across the country, so it gets very, very difficult to ever shut down projects. So we're constantly producing this equipment. Well, that directs policy in certain ways. How can I use this? How can I set things up? Which is why we have hundreds of military bases around the world. But we don't realistically need to defend ourselves, and we're not making anyone any safer by doing it. And simply like pursuing the terror alone, when we talk about terrorists as opposed to like state actors, like the whole Iran situation, with the terrorism, I mean, you're never going to defeat terrorism with a drone strike. Because somewhere along the way, you're accidentally going to kill somebody else, and that's going to create more terrorists. So it's like whack-a-mole, like the little arcade game. You hit one terrorist, and then what pops up? What's the point, right? But from the policymaker's standpoint, that is the point. They're just not telling us that. It is intended to be perpetuated. Getting out of a lot of the specific situations that we're in there is actually easier than people tend to think. It's winning the arguments in Washington and pushing back against the lobbyists that's the harder part. And that requires getting more people actually to run for office who are not in the pockets of the corporations like this that want to maintain those policies. Because at that point, you can actually change the direction. So that's basically taking it from the side, from your position there. If you want to address any specific issue in the countries themselves, I'm happy to talk about those. But the main way we get out is changing our domestic politics here.
I got a question for all three of you guys. Since I did 25 years civil service, I know that there are 23 federal agencies in the federal government. One has a jurisdiction. That's the Park Service. And they have a ministry. I wonder why we don't use government to work with government. Like in the state, we have California Air Resources. We have a National Guard in Sacramento, General. So, other than digging foxholes and running around Fort Early, couldn't they be doing other projects? There are 2 construction battalions. I'm still miffed at Louise and Vargas. And, Nunes is another story. But then the thing is, you got agencies in the federal government that we can work on, Salt Sea. There's agencies in the federal government that we can do, instead of having drills out in the middle of Fort Airway and playing war games, sending people out, why not making it more fireproof? Earth building construction, yes, the military does do earth building construction, we've got that. Because you can't import all these sticks to go out there and construct it. I was seeing that base there and saying, why in the hell would you have a barracks made of sticks when there's a missile and you see the missile just. But if it was an earth wall that was like 15 inches thick, it would be R-25 out there in the 42 Celsius weather. It could also withstand a missile, and it probably would be still standing. You know, and it's far less than 10% of the cost to make it. And it's nothing new, they've been doing it for centuries. So I don't know.
I think I have a simple answer. It might address like the core of that, and then I can bring you guys into it as well because there's interaction there between federal policy and then state and local policy. We would touch on your question here.
That's
So,
like touching on GSA Rule 500.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems you have in approaching some of the big foreign issues and things like defense spending is always the jobs and people that are already working in these different areas, right? The money is already allocated, the stuff is already sitting there, so then people are just twiddling their thumbs and playing war games, right? Because it is set aside for that. So the solution isn't just to walk in immediately and say, let's cut the defense budget and slash it and just, you know, everyone's unemployed. It would actually have significantly negative economic consequences. You can gradually phase back spending by directing things more and more into civilian projects. And the federal government would have a role in that initially. What you can do is redirect resources that already exist because of that military spending to tons of civilian infrastructure projects, right? Actually deploy the people who know how to do stuff to actually fix real problems that we have. And then over a period of time, you start slowly devolving things more to a state and local level. You start gradually phasing things out as the civilian economy begins growing because of that investment. Because investment in the local economy, that's what builds things up anyway. You get more people spending, everything's picking up there, more jobs get transferred out. So gradually the federal role in that could decline. Right? So I would be proposing that. If anybody starts talking about the defense budget, I'm going to be like, okay, so how can we start shifting those resources to good places where they can help out in the states?
I mean, Mary Grandpa in Stockton, I was in an engineer outfit, and we painted the Mary Grandpa as combat exercise. I was in Connecticut with the Thomason Bridge when it fell down, and we made a combat exercise, and we put a Bailey Bridge there.
Right. I mean,
It's
want to get a
still
new
used
bridge
in-
built? Bring in the Army Corps of Engineers, get a bridge. I mean, there's no reason why we
the
can't
National
use
Guard.
these resources.
That's the Connecticut National Guard. They have an engineer battalion.
Right. So yeah, I would want to start
Yeah.
directing more resources to that, and then the state can
And
pick
once
up
they
those.
direct more resources, then yes, I mean, you know, in this area, I've been driving all around the district. So in this area, the roads seem a little bit better than down in like the San Diego County part of the district. But, you know, they can go in and help up with our crumbling infrastructure. You know, that is a great way to stimulate the economy is by fixing our roads. And then I would like to invest some of that money into education and healthcare as well. That would help.
You got the
If we have to,
83rd Combat Engineer Battalion headquarters in Santa Fe.
yeah.
Why send them over to Wisconsin? Why send them out to Florida or Arkansas? They could have been doing it.
Build some roads and stuff.
So yeah, as Liz mentioned, building roads. So one thing that they can do is the fact that the town where I'm from, Anza, is out in the middle of Palm Desert and Temecula. It's the middle of nowhere. That town exists because Highway 371 goes through. We got Highway 79 that comes up here. Those highways, those pathways were created by the Army Corps of Engineers to get their tanks from the desert to Belton. So it was for their own selfish purposes. However, they built something that developed into something greater. So I do believe that our armed forces could be used for something locally that's much better. I know, and again, once it comes back to our domestic policy, to making sure that our people, our working people who are working for the military are doing things for us and things that are adherent to our values. The Mexican army, for example, they are not a very warlike country. They don't have wars with anybody, I think. The narco, maybe. But other than that, the Mexican army are the first responders for natural disasters. The Mexican army came in after Katrina. They sent in, I don't know what number of soldiers, but they sent a large number of soldiers to help out during that search and rescue, the search and rescue efforts. They sent people already to Australia. I would like to see some of our military sent to help out with the rush for Australia. I do believe we sent someone already. Firefighters on there. But our army, I mean, I know we have our trouble right now. We have the war to take care of. But as my generation, and I hope these guys think the same way, we don't want that anymore. We want to see our country no longer be the police of the world and start being helpers, saviors of the world. We can do that. We have the resources. We have the army. It's there. So might as well use it for something good instead of killing
If you go to
families.
other countries like Canada, look at the Canadian National are doing civic clients.
I mean, this is actually the norm. I mean, most of Western European countries do the same thing. I mean, the Dutch are a lot better at search and rescue operations than they are at everything else. I mean, that's what they do more often than they're going to participate in those things. So there's no reason why we could not transition to the same kind of model and actually help out a lot. And there's tons of projects we can get in. It's not just roads.
Homeless shelters, affordable housing, green energy,
I give you a
set
simple
up.
one just from my own life. I mean, where I live, in the northern part of Lake Elsinore, I'm actually on a well. I'm not even connected to any kind of civic water, and there's no high-speed internet that connects to my house. It literally does not exist. I have my phone, and that's it. Right? They just never bothered putting it there. We have cut investment in tons of infrastructural areas, which means there are literally, by this point, dozens of countries with better access to high-speed internet than in the United States, where the internet was actually invented, which I think is kind of a shame.
Go ahead.
I'm not completely clear on how you guys are trying to impact what's like world and international affairs. What you guys are mainly like local politicians, correct?
He's
Yeah.
running for.
Mine is a federal office.
Yeah, but what I mean is like, I want to understand how you're gonna help the local and like more accessible for you guys state more than board that is like left for like Senate and Congress and everything to decide for.
Right. Want to go first?
So the question is, how do we want to help here locally?
Yeah, how are you gonna impact
Oh gosh,
what you're running for?
I'm like, I have so many passion points, so I don't even know where to start. But one of them is ensuring that everybody has access to education, starting at the preschool level and then going through 4 years. I think that that's very important. I don't think that anybody should not get the education that they want based off of their socioeconomic status. Another thing is just, you know, like I was saying before, like we need to make sure that if somebody's working in our district, they can afford to live in our district. So we need to make sure that, you know, either the rents are available for whatever the wages are in that area, or affordable housing is available too. And then also I want to creating more green and renewable energy jobs, weaning away from the fossil fuel industry and getting quicker than what the state's saying 2050. I would sign on to the 2035 plan for 100% renewable energy by 2035 instead of 2050, because by 2050 it's done. You know, we need to focus on that faster. But the great thing is that it's not going to necessarily cost us more in the long run. It will end up saving us money in the long run and creating more jobs too, that are good, you know, livable wage jobs. That's just a few things, but healthcare also is a really big issue for me. Healthcare costs have gotten out of control, like not only here in California, but in the whole, you know, the whole nation. So, I mean, if Congress and them take something up with healthcare, that's great. But if not, here in California, we do need to look for ways to be able to lower those healthcare costs, you know. Nobody should go bankrupt just because they got sick, and nobody should die just because they don't have health insurance. So we really need to, find where that lies. Now, I personally believe that Medicare for all is the way to go. I think that, if we don't have to come out of pocket for deductibles, prescriptions, dental, vision, all of that, and we can save money, I want to do that. But I don't want us to be paying more money for less services. I want us to be paying less money for equal or better services. So I want to be able to make sure that the rural areas too, it's a big concern in this community. We have a lot of rural communities that already are having trouble accessing healthcare. So we need to make sure if the state is going to implement something like that, that we're protecting our communities and ensuring that there's incentives to ensure that there is accessible healthcare in those areas too, that people aren't left behind. So it's a really big thing to look at. I want to do it the right way though. I don't want to just jump into it. I want to make sure that everybody, will be covered under that plan and that everybody can afford to live like that. So that's something. I could go on for we could talk for 3 hours, and I'll give you my cell phone, we can talk, because there's a lot of things that I want to help improve the way of life in the community. And then
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because most people don't understand those layers of government, who can do what for your community. So again, Liam's going to do things for the world, and now it'll take a couple of years. Liz as well.
I'm the first one to give you this question too.
And as a local candidate, we are the ones that have the most direct impact on your lives, as far as fees, land use issues, which seem boring but really are relevant. One of my top issues personally is homelessness. I've worked with the homeless communities. I work with Hot in Temecula. I've worked with the Point in Time Count and some other groups in San Diego trying to reach out to the homeless. Now, homelessness isn't a single just people out in the street living in a tent issue, and giving them a house as well isn't going to solve it. Most homeless, 1 out of 3 suffers of mental illness. 40% of our homeless are youth, and they are hard to identify. It is just impossible to dial it down to a single thing. But my approach is empathy. These are human beings, and we have to stop seeing them like numbers. This year we lost 95 people in Riverside County on the street. That seems like just a number, 95. We lose more, whatever, elsewhere. But 95 people lost their lives, unsheltered human beings on the street. That is messed up. That is a really messed up statistic. And the fact that we can just go along like nothing, 20%, we had a 20% increase in veterans, speaking of what we do in our domestic policy, 20% increase in veterans that are homeless, and it's just getting worse. And these are things that, again, working together with state and federal candidates, we can actually do to improve the quality of life of these individuals by giving them treatment and housing at the same time. Now, another thing that's important is allowing individuals to conduct business. This seems like a very middle of the line policy, but the fact is that Riverside County has some of the highest fees and licensing procedures in the entire state, which is a state that in itself has super huge fees, super huge permitting. And the problem is that Riverside County is the largest employer in Riverside County. It employs 22,000 people. That's 3 times larger than the second largest employer. So it is too big to fail, and therefore it tries to bleed its people in order to survive. I worked with cannabis farmers out in Anza for a long time. They fought for their right to have small farms, not big farms. They wanted small farms, and they were zoned out. Now, each farm would create approximately 10 jobs in a community that makes $19,000 on average a year. So we need jobs, but they installed a permitting system that was $60,000 and above just to get a permit to start working, non-refundable. Obviously, people aren't going to start small businesses. So you need to give people a chance to start small businesses, to get good jobs, and able to thrive. Or else you're gonna have to see her kids are gonna have to leave California. We're losing people. We're probably gonna lose a congressional district, possibly. Or two,
Probably two.
because of the amount of people who are leaving California. And Riverside County is one of the largest culprits of bleeding its people, so we cannot thrive here. And we're leaving people, we're losing people en masse, so we have to protect that. We have to protect those local jobs and those local entrepreneurs. That's what I stand for.
And if we're paying, like for our youth to be educated in this state, like our tax money is going to educate them, we want to keep that educated workforce here in California. We're giving other states free educated people to work for them, and that's part of like our investment in our like families and our communities and in our future is, trying to keep those people, here and be able to live. You guys?
Investment is a good way of thinking about that too, because people will often attack Democrats or people on the left side of the American political spectrum as just wanting to give you handouts, free stuff, whatever. They're not actually thinking about, people building up their own lives. What people generally want, and what I'm generally arguing for, is greater equality of opportunity, increasing people's chances to succeed, which we used to do much better than we are now, which is why opportunity is shrinking so much. So finding ways to actually empower people to create small businesses and succeed rather than constantly collapsing there is a good one there. There are also a bunch of ways in which federal policy directly affects the local level. Now, you couldn't turn to me about street lights or business licensing or like a farm issue or things like that, or local education funding, whatnot. I mean, not my area, but overall wage growth. Right, wages have been stagnant for almost 50 years in this country. They stopped growing in the 70s, right? And that is a federal issue, right, related to the way that we manage our tax policy, right? We took away the incentives to actually increase people's wages. At the same time, productivity has been skyrocketing, right? So every hour we work makes somebody more money and they pay us less, right? That has a huge impact on people on the ground in this area, right? As well as all across the country, right? We're fighting right now just to try and get a $15 minimum wage. If you were actually to take into account productivity gains as well as things like inflation, the minimum wage should be in the 30s, right? And we're still arguing over whether it should be 15, right? We have a long way to go to try and reverse a 40-year trend. It's going to take a long time to kind of like spin that around and push us back in the other way, where we actually can start growing again. You look back at policies in the 70s, poverty was actually falling. Poverty fell by 10% across the 1970s because of the war on poverty and actual policies that helped to lift people up. We reversed course in the 1980s. Poverty's been climbing ever since. Right? More and more people are slipping through the cracks. Right? In the last 20 years, the bottom 50% of the country have lost $1 trillion in wealth. Like, it's literally a negative number. We're falling. Right? And that, I think, we need to change. And those are federal issues that directly impact people on the ground here.
One of the things.
Can we do everybody speak first before we go again?
Hi. I think this is for everyone, but I feel like this might be more directed towards you, Liam. So I want to go back to something you said earlier about technology, because as we know, data has surpassed oil in terms of resource value recently. And we live in the age of technology, but the U.S. is still so far behind every other country. So how can we better our technology in terms of cybersecurity to protect the U.S. and our interests without military action?
Sadly, all of that is just policy driven. It's not like the abilities are not there. We actually have by far the best cybersecurity professionals on the planet, but we don't use them effectively. We have consciously chosen not to invest in certain areas, just like we've chosen not to invest in the infrastructure that affects ordinary people, right? I mean, when even poorer countries like Estonia decide to lay in the infrastructure so everyone has access to high-speed internet, that's a policy choice, right? When governments actually spend money to protect vital assets to prevent cyber attacks, that's a policy choice. And we've seen people making proposals like that keep getting shut down. So that's an argument we just have to win there. It's not a matter of like the ability not being there. We lack the political will to actually invest properly and use it.
Okay, I have two questions. So one for Liz, because I know she's my assembly representative, and then for Edison. So for Edison, so what he was talking about with the county and the cannabis laws, like that's specifically affected my family trying to start a business, and he's not lying about it. I talked to them directly that they said, the state of California implemented these laws to make it legal and make it for recreational and to allow small businesses to operate, and it's a $5,000 license fee through the state. Riverside County said, yeah, we will charge you 30, maybe 40,000, and we can still tell you no. So it's just losing money. So they're literally killing businesses. And that money, the taxes we would pay, would go to schools and all kinds of things. So I wanted to know specifically, like, what else does, like, the Board of Supervisors do? Because I'm more familiar with, like, the Assembly District, but, like, what else does the Board of Supervisors do that, like just on a regular basis, what are their kind of things they do? Yeah, and then for Liz, what are your specific ideas for, like, to make housing affordable? Like, what's the policy that would change that? So those are the two questions.
Okay, so yes, the Board of Supervisors are basically the city council for the entire county. And city councils supersede their authority. So if a city, say for example, Riverside County establishes a county-wide ban on vapes, and the city of Temecula decides that you can, no, actually the other way around. They say you can vape in Riverside County. City of Temecula says you can't. Well, then the city supersedes the power of the county. That power obviously does not exist in the unincorporated areas. So all of the outskirts, all of the mountain communities, supervisors have authority over as if they were their de facto mayor. Things they do, they allocate budgeting to all of the county resources. These are the Department of Social Services, for the county, for Department of Health, Ag, and most importantly, they give the sheriff their money. So according to, and most cities contract the sheriff out. So for example, the city of Hemet does not have their own police department. They contract the Riverside sheriffs through the supervisors. So they allocate this. The Board of Supervisors also has a large pension fund. They have an investment through CalPERS by which they pay all county employees, and they do code enforcement and all of these other issues that do not pertain to the cities. And they also approve and disapprove developments, and which is one of the problems with the county board of supervisors, because since most people don't really care what happens at a local level, these guys are funded. These are $500,000 elections for people you don't even know. They make $157,000 a year for people you don't even know that you're funding, because you're funding them through property taxes. And they approve developments out in the unincorporated areas, and it's just, there are 5 people who control the land, and it's important to have people who actually care about their constituents rather than their corporate donors, because the people behind them are very powerful individuals that have deep pockets, and it's hard to fight against them, so we're trying. That's what they do.
Okay, so affordable housing at a state level. Few different things. One of the simplest things that can probably be done like immediately within the first year is working to get all of the places where developers need to go to get grants and funding for affordable housing, putting it under one roof. Right now, when you want to build affordable housing, you have to go to approximately 8 different places that are in different buildings and different offices and desks to meet with different people just to get through the process to build affordable housing. Well, that person is obviously paid, and it's taking a lot of their time, which also costs money. So the more you delay housing, the higher the cost gets. So at the Board of Supervisors level, they should be having a shorter time frame for approving, the permitting and things, because the more something is being in that process, the more expensive the house gets. So that's just one of the very simple fixes. Another thing is start building homes on our land. Like, land is one of the most expensive components when purchasing a home. So if we just have it be on our government land and we build housing, it can be much more affordable. And then the great thing is that when that house sells, we're still owning the land, so that cost of that house doesn't jump too much in price. That keeps it affordable for the next person. Because a lot of times what ends up happening is people will come in because they're like at 50% AMI, and they'll buy a home that's approved for 50% AMIs, and they won't even live in it, and they'll turn around and either rent it for really high or turn around and sell it for more, so which is not helping our affordable housing market. So, ensuring that when a house is resold, that it also stays affordable in those aspects for the lower AMIs. That's one way. Another way is just to have, again, the local municipalities like Board of Supervisors, things like that, look at the GPs, and look at what's near public transit, and can we get higher density, or mixed use near public transit areas, because that's going to bring down, housing costs. And a lot of people like myself who would appreciate affordable housing would also appreciate being next to, a trolley line or a transit system, to ensure that I don't have to be driving everywhere as well. So those are just 3 different ideas. There's like a lot more policy to get into, but ultimately, higher density homes, public land, and making sure that it is reasonable for developers to be able to build affordable housing, because right now we're not making it easy for them. So if it's not easy, why do they want to do it? So yeah, those are a few things.
Something I can piggyback on.
Yeah, you can actually. I'm like,
building. I like the building idea. You brought up the public land.
Oh yeah.
It's a brilliant idea. Now, for most of our civilized history, as in living in cities and whatnot, just the last few thousand years here, people did not own the land underneath them, and in most societies around the world, they didn't either. Right? And that in many cases lasted all the way up until the 19th century, the 20th in some places. All the way up to the 19th century, yes, about the Middle East a lot, the Ottoman Empire had no concept of private property and land. But people had their houses, they had their businesses, and they owned it. They had large chunks of agricultural land, so you might have your large farm. What you established were what was called like usufruct rights. If I start grazing my goats here, I've established the right to use this land. No one else can use it. I get to use this land. But you didn't have to buy it from somebody in the first place, right? There's no one living on this hill. I'm going to build my house there. I now have the right to have that house. My house is now inviolable. It's my property. But you didn't have to buy the land in the first place. Now, I wouldn't suggest tossing our system, but in isolation, using public lands, we need to adopt a similar mentality where you can set aside large chunks of publicly owned land and then develop things on there where people did not have to put up the land cost in the first place. You just have the housing, which would radically lower the cost of putting that out there. So if you can cut the costs in terms of like the supervisors, all the extra red tape there, and then you can provide public land from both the state or the federal government to build on there, we can easily house people. And for things like homelessness, there's a lot of other issues like I said that cause it, but tons of empirical evidence suggests that if you want to solve the problem, you house them first. Give someone the dignity of a place to live, and they have a chance to start solving the other problems in their lives that made them homeless in the first place, or that kept them homeless, right? So making that cheaper to do makes sense to me.
I really like it when history professor Liam comes out.
I know. We can be just like the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
Big one.
Yeah.
Mike?
I have a question. I think it probably pertains most of it, but you guys. I remember I moved to San Diego in 1980. And I was a teacher. I remember everyone was talking about something that happened before I got Prop 13, which limited property taxes 1.25%. That whatever you bought the property for, your yearly property tax would be 1% of that purchase price per annum. It would never return. And I heard some of the history. I read it when I was a kid. Yeah, there were some property values going so fast, like the 70s. People getting reassessed every year and raising up their taxes. Some of that you can see some of the rationale. Maybe went too far, but. One thing I always realized in the last couple of years was this also applied to commercial property. So there are companies that $1 billion a year profit companies that are paying property taxes on properties they bought 40, 50 years ago that are ridiculous. It seems like something like that could be fixed.
That's a ballot measure. That's up to the voters.
Right.
So there is, on the ballot, there will be something to reform Prop 13. There's a lot of confusion out there and a lot of scare going out there. People are like, oh, they're coming after your homes, they're coming after homeowners, like, you know, our senior citizens will be homeless after this. Now, what's on the actual ballot has nothing to do with regular people like you and me, unless there's somebody in here who owns like a huge corporation that I don't know about. But our taxes are safe untouched with that. What it would do is it would reevaluate large corporations. So for instance, what Disney's been paying the same since like the 50s because it hasn't changed hands ever. So it would be just reassessing those large corporations that have enough money to go ahead and pitch in a little bit more to their taxes to help our communities more.
So it's all.
And it would go to the schools. So that's the schools and communities first is what it's referred to if you guys have heard it around town. So yeah, it wouldn't touch any of us, and I would be completely opposed to any legislation or anything that would increase costs for homeowners because that we're paying, I'm sorry, but we are paying our fair share of taxes. We just need to figure out where is it all going because it's not coming back to us. You know, we need to go ahead and take away the wasteful spending and really put it into, you know, the communities and helping us. We don't need to pay any more in taxes. Now, corporations who make, you know, millions and billions of dollars and don't pay their people a livable wage and all that, yeah, they can pay a little bit more. I'm okay with that. I'm definitely okay with that, but not us.
If the proposition doesn't pass, is there anything the state legislature?
No, anything having to do with that has to be voted on by the voters. It's a California state law. Like anything, like the legislator cannot decide by itself and rubber stamp something. That is something that the voters themselves need to decide. And, you know, just definitely read it and, you know, your opinion and your vote is your vote. So just, you know, make sure that you read it and, yeah, try not to get scared off by some of that.
Are candidates making a stand on this issue? You know what I'm saying? Like, are other state senators and governor and state assembly people are they talking about this? Are they getting behind it? Or are they kind of, I don't want to know because I don't want to get, you know, my name.
People are taking stances one way or the other, for sure, on this one.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, California is one of a handful of states that allows for voter initiatives, and they will always supersede what comes out of Sacramento. That's just a constitutional issue for us, so we have to push back against that. And that's actually, in some ways, one of the dangers of them. I mean, it's more popularly democratic on the one hand, but it's a little easier to manipulate in some ways. And that gets back to an interesting argument people had about tax. Anytime the word tax comes up, people get scared because they think it's coming after them. And we do generally pay too much already in taxes. The problem is we change the tax code such that the wealthy are not paying their taxes and the corporations are not paying their taxes. And that actually is one of the single biggest factors driving all of our wages down, because it changed the incentives. If you look around the rest of the developed world today, you still see about a 20-to-1 or so ratio, sometimes less, between CEO pay and your average worker. In the US, it's around 400 times, because that, if you take away the high taxes on high earners, then they can vote themselves a high salary. Why not? Why not make themselves rich? Because they get to choose to do that, right? But if they can't, if there's no logical reason to do it, because the state would just take it, then they actually spend that money on the workers, right? By letting people win the argument about tax as a whole and making the idea of taxes themselves terrifying, right? Because they affect us, it's made it harder for us to deal with like the issues, higher up, like corporate taxes and taxes
In our small businesses.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Mr. Gomez, that Riverside County is one of the first counties to have a Department of Foreign Affairs. And that's where the great Chinese grape company is out there in Coachella. And they did that because the federal government hasn't pushed their diplomatic corps to negotiate these things. And so what we're having is all 50 states doing negotiations. And so it's been decentralized. In fact, in the Salton Sea area, in Imperial County, where Joe Vargas is, being 56, he's negotiating directly with Mexico to work on the thing because of the abandonment of the Hidalgo Treaty of 1848 by our current president and the Border Patrol, Border Commission, which regulated the hordes and things across the border that was looting that was created by American entrepreneurs and then left. And then, so that's why the San Diego River has it. That's why the Alamo River that flows in. And so that's what is created now in Washington and over here on all the border states is they're doing the direct negotiations with Mexico because the diplomatic corps has been cut. And when I go to India, I get to see that 4-story jail out there. Did a $5 million overrun. We finally lost Jeff Stone. Thank you. And he's the one that created that, and it's been an albatross on Riverside County.
The John Illinois Detention Center. Yeah. I'm not really sure there was a question in there, but
I would like to know what you're going to do
the-
with the jail and how you're going to get the Riverside County Department of Affairs.
And the form one is actually great because we live. It's a really unusual time in our history, really, where local politicians and state politicians actually are involved in foreign policy. The state of California negotiates directly. When Trump announced we were pulling out of the Paris deal, California said no, we're not. And
What's the largest economy in the world?
California
We'll
will
take
stay
this.
in it even if the federal government is not.
Right.
That's weird in our history
Well, it's
here.
interesting.
But we have a chronically underfunded State Department.
Yeah, now. Yeah, we go between 5th and 6th. Last time I checked, we're 5th again.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
got a question over here?
You had a question?
Yes, we were talking about how you guys mentioned benefiting the youth, and
Yeah.
since we are the youth, we want to know specific policies or specific ways in which my life and our lives is going to be affected.
No student loan debt. Right there. I'm going to help you out for the next 20 years. You won't have any student loan debt.
Yeah,
We pay off
but how
this
will
all.
you go to doing that? What is maybe one pathway you can
So right now, Gavin already signed in the 2 years of community college, and the other 2 years is tentatively coming up. I would push for that, first, to get to the community college level, and then look at our CSUs, things like that, to join forces as well. Because I think that, like I was saying, I don't think that people shouldn't be able to go to college just because they weren't born into the family that had the pocketbook. Everybody should be able to have an equal education regardless. People should be able to follow their passions and their dreams. If my son wanted to be a doctor, honestly, I don't know how he would do that with my income, right? So, if he wanted to. Now, when people pursue things that they're passionate about, they are better at those things. In the job, they are better. People, let's just use doctor for instance, people will get better treatment, better care, because they have somebody in that position who wants to do it. Not that their family had already done it, so they're going through the line, but they're passionate about it. And freeing us from student loan debt, just all in all, it's gonna make the economy better, because then you can go out and you can afford to, be a consumer in the economy and help stimulate the economy as well. So it's a win-win situation there as far as youth goes. But ultimately, I think some of the major concerns that I'm hearing from youth, and you are youth, so please tell me, is our environment, our student loan debt, and affordability to actually live. What else?
You're not wrong on all three.
Okay, is there other things that I'm not?
I feel like every other problem is encompassing in every other one.
Cost of living is a big one, yeah.
And cost of living, goes into literally everything. that's such a, and I hate saying it because it's such a generic blanket statement, but it covers so much of everything that we need to fix with California right now.
Just a quick one to this, and just watch me so I don't wander off too much, because education policy is a big, interesting area. But I can tie it to the Prop 13 one too. State spending on education, including higher education, has been plummeting for quite some time. The states do not spend as much per student. California universities used to be free. The California State University and the University of California, the single best university system in the world. 2 of the top 10 campuses in the world are UC schools, right? They were tuition free. We cut the funding because we couldn't afford it anymore because of things like the property tax and the corporate tax issue anymore. So the federal government, could it step in and provide the money? Instead of the federal government providing the cash for that, what it did was it provided unlimited student loans, which then creates no incentive for the schools to control prices. They can leave them wherever they want, let the tuition climb, because, regardless of, our ability to pay, the tuition can climb, and we can just take student loans out, which means people are graduating with $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 in debt. You're basically carrying a mortgage and trying to start a life that way. So, and it's a huge impact on, but not just higher education, making trade schools more accessible, right? Because not everyone wants to go to college, right? So making education better, improving wages, lowering the cost of housing. There's tons of areas in which all of us could directly improve your quality of life.
So one thing I want to add on education, as per California, the county, then in Riverside County is a particular case, it takes care of its own education. It funds its education program. Obviously, there's one part comes from federal, one part comes from state, but the majority of it comes from the county. From our $6.4 billion budget, Riverside County only allocated 1% of it to education. So again, that's one of where priorities really take place. 40% of it is in public safety, which is good, but of that 40%, I believe 20% is into code enforcement, which, tying back to what Tara said, they're enforcing things. They are making people's lives miserable out in their incorporated areas, or they could be using that funding for education. Pre-K, I know that this doesn't matter to you, but pre-K education and after-school programs for rural communities really make a difference. Right here this is a small city, but even in the cities, you have access to language schools, you have access to martial arts, and whatever you want to go to. In rural communities, we don't have that. There is nothing. There's drugs and dirt bikes. And personally, I prefer dirt bikes, but those are your options
Arts
out there.
and music.
Yes, let's give them some arts and music, and as well for the cities. I mean, this is something that your city council would have to do, but the supervisor himself can influence what the Board of Education does, and basically put more money into education. I mean, that's all we have to do. We just have to fund it. We have the programs are there, they exist. We just have to put some money behind it, and we can.
And we can, and I just want to say, I was just going to say, not everything can happen overnight because that's fiscally irresponsible and would lead us down a really dangerous path, but we need to start laying the foundation for what comes next. okay, so next year can we do this, and then next year after this can we do this, and we need to build on it, to ensure that, in like the next 10 years, we have everything that we want and we're talking about. And by 2035, we have all of the renewable energy. So, it's really like building the foundation and the path looking forward as to budgeting for these things. If I could snap my fingers and be like, yes, like, and everything like would be fine fiscally, that'd be awesome. But yeah, we're gonna have to take our
borderline tier.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. But you need somebody there leading the fight to lay that foundation. So.
Yeah, another question there?
Well, you hit several points in higher education, but I mean, it's really in Congress's ball to change the funding, to allow for refunding of student loans. That's the only
Student
loan
loan issue, yes.
you can't refund, that you can't fault on, but it's really a congressional
And it
issue.
got pushed through so they can't even be discharged in bankruptcies anymore.
Right.
So, yeah,
Right.
it's- that
But
was
that's
a mistake.
major. Again, because you've hit on it. University of California, it's probably the state is only paying about 45% right now for the freight. Most of it comes in from extramural research funding and from student tuition. And as long as that state contribution goes down, the cost of education is going to go up.
right. Tuition keeps going up.
It has to go up.
I mean, a lot of especially the research schools, I mean, UCI has built like massive corporate parks for people to build their research facilities there, so they'll donate money, which then means we're going to pursue their objectives more than anything else. It's terrible for our education as well.
There's a lot of money. Money's the problem, like in politics right now, right? I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Well,
Like,
corporate finance.
well, just, I mean, yeah, like all the candidates make, promises to people who are giving them money, and then this is what we end up with. We end up with silly laws that, the student loan is, is run by a very small group of people who are profiting off of it.
I've often
People who have
joked
donated to
people in
political
Congress
campaigns
should
like
wear
crazy to make sure that they can continue to profit off of it. That, I mean, money in politics, I think, is a lot of our problem right now.
really
The
is.
root of it.
And I mean, people in Congress should be wearing NASCAR jackets.
That's what I do.
I mean, they really, because they work for them, right? And most of the
Right.
legislation is actually written by corporate lobbyists at this point, and a lot of our representatives don't even read it. And that's on us, that's on the level I'm on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in there that do not belong there. But there is actually money for tons of things. People often argue about this. You guys are talking about all these things you can do, but that all costs money, and you're going to raise taxes. No, the money's there. It's literally money there. Edison mentioned the money spent on enforcement, right?
Yeah.
So just think about this for a second. Let's connect it to another issue, because all these things interrelate. Homelessness, right? It literally would cost less to give them an apartment
Right.
than we spend in just the enforcement, picking people off the streets, taking them into hospitals, holding them in the jails. We spend ridiculous amounts of money on it, and yet people are pushing now only for enforcement, and we don't solve the problem. A fiscally responsible solution is actually just to house people. Right? But we have to win the arguments and present, the numbers behind these policies and say, look, this is how we can make it better. And then the voters actually have to step up and help get us out of it. Liz is pointed to the clean money issue. I mean, that ultimately is going to be on us. We have to get enough people in there to change the laws so that we can actually get better financing of elections here. Otherwise, it's going to stay exactly as corrupt as it is. Right? It's a tricky fight.
The only patches I would wear if I had a NASCAR jacket are, small donors like yourself. Like I see a few of them in this room even. Mine would just have people's names on it. Like my opponent would have Philip Morris and another tobacco company and a few alcohol companies and a bunch of insurance companies. That would be his jacket. That's where he's getting all his money from. But I'm getting my money from Tara and James and Mike. And yeah, I would have your names on my jacket. So keep donating. I'll put your name larger.
I would say one thing that needs very much in this county is we need airplane mechanics. And 3 that are over there in Emmett Ryan, CDF 5, they pull $100,000 a year without a college education. But we really depend on them because CDF 5 fights all the fires. A lot of them. And you have another airport there that in Anza. That's Executive Air. And so I think there needs to be an apprenticeship program because how do you keep these guys flying? and we have fires all the time. And those mechanics in him and Ryan repair the jets. They also repair the 3 helicopters, the new $5 million helicopter that the Riverside County had bought.
15 million dollar
million.
helicopter, yes.
Yeah, and so they had to retrain them, which is 2 weeks, because the helicopter is a different, the new one is a different animal than the other one that they had before. So you have to retrain the mechanics, and that's right here, you have it, Ryan. I think needs to be looking at, the VA has got a thing on retraining people that get out of the military and they use up their educational benefits. We have a full-time VSO, Veteran Service Officer, for those who don't know, in Hemet right now. They don't have to go to Loma Linda. They don't have to go all the way down to San Diego. They can go right here to Hemet. And maybe we can set up a program for apprenticeship so I don't have 5 veterans a month committing suicide because they got nothing else.
Yeah, well, like I was gonna say, that's one of Edison's passion points about local, local.
Creating, I mean, opportunities at a local level is what we should do, especially for a supervisor, for someone who's running for a local office. That, I mean, I didn't know of this, but once you bring it to light, of course, most definitely this is something that we should be doing. And we should do it for every single aspect of our community, basically. If we can create it locally, it should. It sounds a bit nationalist, but at a local level, it's very important to stimulate that.
Did you know that 10% of the military is Native American?
I didn't actually know that.
And most of them are like Ira Hayes. They have problems, they come back, and they go back to the reservation, and in 5 years, they commit suicide that day.
It's a very high suicide rate against all our veterans. But yeah, definitely partnering with unions is something that I think we've all been, passionate about as far as like, getting more, ability for like vocational training, more trade, training. I think, Edison was saying like not everybody is, geared to go into a college or, a vocational school, but we definitely need, people learning the trades.
There is money for that in veterans.
Oh, there's
down
money.
in
The
San
unions have
Diego,
paid.
and there with the VA Center is Veterans in Business. And there's a lot of things that can be done if the county wanted to do it and open up these closed storefronts in the middle of town and have a veteran go out there and set up a business. There is things like that.
I think it's more about like the education factor too, like getting into the high schools when the colleges are there, when the armed services are there, getting the unions into it, being able to, discuss with the kids all of their options for,
And you brought up the case of suicide. Most of these situations, just like suicide, homelessness, it's what's most important is getting these programs out there, letting people know they exist. I've seen pamphlets about suicide all over the place, but it's still not enough. You can see it right now, but when you need it, that's when it has to be readily accessible. The same thing happens with homelessness. There are programs for veterans in Riverside County. No veteran should be homeless in Riverside County. There are programs, as soon as the hot team in Temecula finds a veteran, there's a bed for him and there's a home for him. But it's a matter of getting this information out there and disseminating all this information so people can get this access to these resources. Veterans are a priority and will always be a priority in this county.
They make good entrepreneurs and workers
There was a comment
because they've
about
gone through.
higher education earlier, higher education funding. And there's a lot of discussion at the national level showing the presidential elections, whatnot here about tuition-free colleges and all that kind of stuff. But what's often left out of the media coverage of that is that a lot of the plans actually include trade schools and should, right? That the money should be there for certification programs, for union apprenticeships, right? For particular trade schools if somebody wants to be a machinist, right? Not everyone wants a 4-year degree, right? All the paths should be open and they should all be affordable. And all the schooling has gotten more and more expensive. Right? And we forget that that's how we built the middle class in the first place, was we made education affordable, right? I mean, People were
Right.
moving out to suburbia in the first place because somebody working in a factory, somebody working as a machinist was actually able to make a good enough living to do that. The
My dad's
wages
a
were high, the
machinist.
training was there. We had to have the money to train people in the first place, and that's been drying up.
Yeah, it was a GI Bill.
Exactly, yeah.
It stimulated the whole thing.
Yeah.
It did.
My father, her father, all of them.
Right, and that's
My
how
dad,
investment
when he
always
got back
works.
from Vietnam, that's what he did. He went into, a trade school and learned, how to be a machinist.
We invest
Building jet
in,
engine parts.
if we invest in our children, if we invest in infrastructure, it always pays itself back.
It does.
It always makes us all richer, and we've stopped doing a lot of that.
When I grew up, there weren't any interstate highways. It wasn't until Eisenhower, some people thought that it was part of national defense. That's how the interstate across the United States was built.
Yeah, just think about
They
the
created-
countless trillions of productivity that we've gained from their existence.
Jobs, and then they left something there for afterwards. And one of the things we have in Riverside County is we don't have a light rail transit, and that's something that's dearly needed amongst. In my district itself, I have Temecula, Murrieta, San Jacinto, and Hemet. These 4 cities are growing exponentially in population, and we do need a mass transit. We need to be a transit-oriented community because, and especially in the unincorporated areas, people travel down every single day. From Idlewild, they work in Hemet. From Anza, they work in Temecula. So we need to interconnect our community. So, and again, building this infrastructure will cost money, but it'll create jobs and it'll leave something for the future. It's book of what you're going to do for the future. We're going to leave them infrastructure that they will be able to build up. I came from San Diego. We depend on that, on those trolleys, like nothing in our lives. Nobody uses the 5 to 15 and the 805. We use a trolley system. I went to school every single day on that trolley, and it cost me $5 a month. That's what we need here in Riverside County. We need to interconnect ourselves.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
do something.
if you build stuff, it's not that difficult to keep going either.
Oh, yeah.
And it can pay back so much of the local economy. I mean, and it's not like these things aren't valuable and used all around the world. Cairo has a metro system, right? And for the equivalent of 16 American cents, I can get anywhere in Cairo. Just hop on the subway and you're there, right? The stuff being built, right? It makes it easier for everybody. You don't have tons of people in the streets and the traffic, the quality of life goes up, it boosts the economy, more people are able to live and work. I mean, these kind of investments really make a difference in the long run.
Yeah.
But we, as
Like our
a country,
interstate.
stop doing it.
It's like, it's 2020's interstate, building a transit system
Yeah.
that can connect communities in a green energy way and not be stuck in traffic.
We need to start dreaming big again, like we used to. I mean, everywhere from
The
FDR,
bullet train.
Eisenhower, Kennedy. I mean, they all gave us visions, right? They
Yeah.
told us what we could do, right? If we invest, we'll all be better off. And they were all right. FDR was right. Ike was right. Kennedy was right. We are better off for those investments. And then we stopped in the 80s making any kind of investments, and that's where a lot of these problems have been building up.
One of the things to know on Riverside County, when I had to go to India 3 days a week. Come April, you have Coachella, and you have the stagecoach. And the problem is you got people from Los Angeles drive all the way in because there's no other way to get in. And then you have people parking on lawns and stuff like that in India, and then it becomes a big problem. And this last year, the Whitewater stop, they had closed it for 6 months, Caltrans. And so I told my sister who works for Caltrans, who's one of the secretary, I said, what are you going to do about this? I says, who the hell? These guys are going to be partying one night. They get up and they got to drive to Los Angeles. And there's no stop in Whitewater, so you had to go down. That's why all the horrendous accidents down by Riverside happened. Because these people have been out for like 14 hours and they're driving. And, well, it's the annual Coachella and Dayton Festival. And if they had a light rail out there, that would take all those people off the road.
We have collisions every day, though, on the freeways because of commuters. I mean, large parts of the Inland Empire are just bedroom communities. I mean, 30% of the 42nd Congressional District, people have to commute out. I have to. There's not a single university in my entire district, so I have to commute into LA.
Same.
Right? So you're packing up the 91, and people always sort of know, well, let's widen the freeway. You could make a 20-lane freeway on the other side and wouldn't solve the problem, because all it would do is feed more construction, more housing out there, and the same cycle keeps going. So we need to fundamentally change the way of
who is funding your politicians and why they end up building what they do. Because freeway expansions are very lucrative contracts. Well, I mean, a light rail would also be, but it's a matter of who is already in their pocket and whose pockets they're in, and that's why they're building it. I mean, right now, if we're doing an expansion on the 215 or 15, it's going to do nothing. It's just going to decongest the traffic for a mile, and it's going to happen a mile down the line. We have to connect our cities so people don't have to take the freeway. So we have one person driving in one car just to move up to the next city. It's madness, really.
What widening the 91 to make no difference at all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
One of the things that I see doing in San Francisco that they do is if you have one card, you can just tap once to get out, tap once to get off.
Yeah.
BART, Samtrans, Muni. So you only need one card to control the whole thing. They have the same thing called Orca in Washington. Same thing.
Metro systems work. I mean, we just don't have the political will to do it.
Yeah.
So it just breaks down every time.
All right, so I want to thank everybody for coming. Just a quick thing, we got that goes on the school. So personally, again, my name is Edison Gomez-Krauss. There are t-shirts and cards over there. Feel free to take one. I'm a person who believes that we deserve a government that values its people above its corporate donors, and that pretty much sums up who I am. So I appreciate you very much coming out, and thank you very much.
Again, I'm Liz Lavertu. I am running in the congressional district over here, just immediately to the west of where we are here in Hammond. I come right up to the edge of Hammond, right? And again, running on a clean money pledge to try and get back to work for the American people, get back to some of these bold visions that made us a rich country in the first place. So I appreciate your help and support in this. Liz, come say goodnight.
Come say goodnight.
I call all the time. So yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so just closing remarks. I'm running because I want to make a more affordable, easier way of life for everybody here in California, for my family, for your family. So if you want, you can help me out by volunteering, or you can visit my website. You can sign up to get my mailings. I'm just running because I care. And anybody who's lived in this district for a while probably doesn't even know the incumbent's name, who is our 71st Assembly District person. And if you do know his name, it's probably because of something that he said that was not appropriate. He's not really doing a lot for us in our community, so I think it's time that we vote for somebody who's actually going to go to Sacramento and work for the people. So again, Elizabeth Lavertu, or Liz Lavertu, since we're all friends now, call me Liz. Liz Lavertu for State Assembly, and I'll see you March 3rd at the polling station.